Hi, this is Brennan Davis from Bedrock Games and the Bedrock blog, and I'm here with Adam Balderstone for another episode of Bedrock and Balderstone. And tonight we're talking about the last episode of Claudius. I know we're a little bit late on this. We've been kind of staggering it out, much to the chagrin of Adam, who's probably had to renew his subscription to the Acorn service. But we finally got to the last episode of Claudius, Old King Log. And so this is the episode after the death of Messalina, where he marries Agrippina the Younger, and Nero becomes his heir, and he decides to just let the poison seep out and hatch a bizarre plot to restore the Republic by just embracing tyranny, essentially. There's a lot more to it than that, but that's sort of the very brief description of the episode. Before we get into the episode itself, Adam, what did you think of this one?
It's a really interesting last episode. I mean, I like the fact that, as far as events that happen in it, everything is, by this point in the story, is so repetitive and predictable as the way things turn out. But having the spin in it of like you said, Claudius having this bizarre plot where it's like, yes, I'm going to do this, and it's all going to be so terrible, it's going to bring the Republic back. This is the thing. The way he is continually just, deliberately playing into their hands, and they're utterly perplexed about why is this so easy? What is happening here? It adds an interesting note to it. I mean, it would be an entirely kind of comedic thing if it wasn't for the fact that none of it ends up working out the way Claudius wants, which ultimately makes the whole thing tragic. But it's a great episode.
Yeah, I was... see, it's funny, because I always... in the past, this has always been kind of my least favorite part of the show. I guess because it's kind of like this is the winding down of the series in a way. And I feel like all the best has already passed. But this time around, I really, really enjoyed this episode in a really big way, and I think part of it was I noticed more things than I had previously noticed, but also I realized I forgot a lot about things that had happened. For example, Narcissus, the freeman, he becomes like his political advisor. I think I was saying the whole podcast that he just kind of disappears from the show and doesn't, and that's not at all the case. I don't know why I assume that. He is there until the bitter end, and he has some of the most interesting lines of dialogue in this episode. He really shines as a character. We really get to see the contrast between him and Pallas, which is, again, I think one of the better aspects of the later episodes of the show. So I have to confess, number one, I was completely wrong about like a crucial detail because I remembered incorrectly. But also I have to say I was wrong in my preview of my rating of this episode, as we got closer to it, because I think I was saying like, this is sort of not my favorite part of the show. This was actually really quite interesting to me. And I want to get into it later because I had some thoughts about this episode in a gaming context, but we'll get to that at the end of the conversation, I think.
Okay.
But yeah, so I don't know what was what did you think of Nero and Agrippina the Younger?
Well, by this point in the show, they are practically like stock characters. You just you got the schemer, and you've got her dumb son she's trying to get on the throne. I mean, it's a continually repeating pattern, and they've become more and more broad as the show comes in. I mean, it's like, the scheming young person who wants to be on the throne. I mean, the first version of it, we kind of had a more tragic character in the early on, at least in that role, and then we've got the really frightening one with Caligula, and this time he's just kind of a buffoon by this point.
And I think that the Agrippinella character, Agrippina the Younger, she is Nero's mother, and she's the sister of Caligula, I believe, and also the daughter of Germanicus. One thing I noticed in this episode that I really hadn't quite caught in previous viewings of it was just how much she sounds like John Hurt. in the way that she talks. Do you know what I mean? Now she's not talking like, you know, she's not sounding like a guy, but she's got like there's a gravel tone to her voice that is very reminiscent of John Hurt's Caligula, and I realized just how closely it pairs them to, you know what I mean? It really makes you realize, like, not only does she sound and kind of look like him, but it's just eerie when you pick up on it. And the guy, who did they get to play Nero in this? Because that guy really needs his own show. I did not Christopher Biggins. Christopher Biggins played Nero.
Okay.
He was just I don't know. I just really like this presentation of Nero. He's like a charmer. Do you know what I mean? He can almost seem like a nice guy on first impressions, but he's just definitely not. So I thought, but I love the way he carried the character, and but to get into the sort of the story of it, the whole thing is kicked off at a dinner with the freemen when they're both trying to get him to choose a wife, and Claudius is kind of having this weird, I don't know what you would call. He's sort of ruminating, and he starts, and it's led into. The beginning of the episode actually starts with Claudius's death. You have Nero and Agrippina the Younger looking at him, and then they go to look at his papers to get his will, and they find his history there, and that's where they stumble on this line where we see, which sort of transitions into the scene with him sort of sitting there thinking the line that he's Old King Log, and he says the frog pool wanted a king, Jove sent them Old King Log. And he decides that his chief fault was he was too benevolent, and that it dulled the blade of tyranny, and so he decides violent disorders call for violent remedies, and he decides to let all the poisons that lurk in the mud hatch out. And it's at this moment that the two advisors are trying to suggest wives to him, and Narcissus suggests a very good. It sounds like we know that Narcissus has his best interest at heart, and he proposes somebody who's probably pretty reasonable, but maybe not all that intelligent. And Pallas takes the angle of, well, she's too stupid, and he proposes in a very sort of clever way. He kind of says, "Ooh, I've just had a revelation. It hadn't occurred to me. She's been so close to us all this time, I didn't even notice." And he suggests Agrippina the Younger, who is Claudius's niece, and Claudius agrees after a sort of lengthy debate and dispute between the two advisors, and Narcissus is besides himself with concern. But I don't know. What did you think of that scene, number one?
It's a very interesting scene. I mean, the way Claudius is just completely detached for most of the scene, reacting to nothing that's being said. I mean, he's clearly listening, but and they're just kind of talking over the top of him, back and forth, and having this big argument here. But I don't know. It's a case where once again you know exactly what everyone's agenda is right off the bat. Because obviously having someone who's not going to be a schemer, that is not smart, that is just going to be there. Everything about the choice that Well, I don't know. What did you think about the scene? I'm sorry.
Oh no, that's okay. That's okay. No, I mean I liked the scene. I thought that it was a really well written scene. I had forgotten that we really did get this much of Pallas and Narcissus, and I do like those characters. So I quite enjoyed that, and I think that it was a really good moment for Narcissus, seeing him sort of have that heated debate with Pallas about the whole topic, and it really kind of crystallizes who these two guys are at this point. Because to make my point now that I kind of lost my thread on before, it's interesting how it is in this episode we really get to see these characters the most openly. It's like typically you'd introduce a character, you give you a feel for them, and then you don't need to explain them. It's kind of interesting that
we get the most upfront portrayal of them at this point in the series.
And a lot of things are very upfront in this episode. Like the whole way that Agrippinella and Nero are portrayed, they're really sort of. I mean, they're dripping with villainy. Do you know what I mean? They're and even when like in the not Narcissus, Pallas goes to Agrippinella, and it turns out that he's clearly her lover, but she's probably just using him to get what she wants. And he tells her that Claudius is agreed, so she goes to Claudius, and she's pretty much like she's not real. I mean, she's trying to deceive Claudius, but just barely. She's wearing all of her like her attempt to seduce him is so
terrible.
Transparent. Yeah, it's so transparent and borderline disgusting. Do you know? It's just like it's and he informs her that he basically says to her like, I have no interest in you physically. I just want your mind. Like I need a smart wife. Basically, is the reason he gives her. And it's interesting to watch how different things are because you said it's like a rhyme. It repeats, and so this is clearly a callback to Livia and Tiberius, but just how different they are from them, and how Agrippinella is, Claudius just sows this seed of concern where she's just like, why is he agreeing so readily? Like, and there's even a later scene where she's sort of trying to pull Olivia, and she's like, oh, I have this idea, and she's trying to be really subtle and suave about it, but he keeps heading her off at the path, and he's like, oh, the answer's yes, before she even says it. The answer's yes. Oh, you want to make Britannicus, you want to make Nero the heir? Fine. But
it's not just that he's saying yes to anything. He knows. He also says what it's going to be when she's like, no, I was done. No, your question's going to be this, right?
And so it's funny because number one, the audience has already seen all this stuff happen before, so he's kind of saying what the audience is thinking in a way, like that.
Yes.
But also he's seen it before because he lived this life, and so it shows the wisdom. But also it's another rhyme because his behavior is so close to Augustus's behavior when he starts to get smart about what's going on around him. That's sort of the way that he's rebuffing Livia, the way that he's sort of teasing her and taunting her when he kind of figures out all the things that she's doing. He's kind of doing the same thing to everybody around him, and so I kind of like that aspect of it.
And it's interesting because, like you say, the audience knows. The show doesn't in any way try and pull the wool over us. Like with Messalina, when Messalina first shows up, we get a number of scenes with Messalina where there is no indication of what she's up to. It's like the show plays a little subtle at first before we really kind of see what she's up to. And but yeah, it would be kind of insulting at this point if the show was going to play the game of, oh, but no, this is going to work out. This is going to be fine.
And it's easier with Messalina. They probably can safely assume most people don't know who she is, but most people have heard the name Nero. So
there is that.
Yeah.
But
the moment Nero shows up, that's a thing.
We get a little harp solo by him and everything, just to play on the fact the audience knows exactly who he is.
And yeah, so but ultimately over the course of the episode, what ends up happening is he makes Nero his heir, and he sort of casts aside his own son Britannicus, but we learn that he believes Britannicus is actually the son of Caligula anyways. And there's this whole scene where he explains to Britannicus why he's been treating him the way he has, and he says to him like, look, I'm telling you who your father is because I just want you to know. But no matter who your father really is, I regard you as my son and I love you. But you're my instrument for restoring the Republic, basically. And he puts all this stuff onto Britannicus, who really doesn't want any of it. Britannicus basically says to him, nobody believes in the Republic anymore. And his plan is very elaborate. He's going to send Britannicus to England, basically, and the Queen there is going to sort of shuffle him north. And I like how they set this up because there's the whole not triumph, but Claudius appears before the Senate when they announce the final victory of conquest over Britain, and they have Caractacus appear before the Senate, and it's a very interesting scene because he basically gives like a William what is it, the Braveheart character,
William Wallace.
William Wallace type, sort of, you better sleep with a sword by your side every night because you're gonna need it. And he's sort of surprised when the Senate applauds him.
Oh, what a wonderful performance! Yes.
And I think it's sort of interesting because, number one, like he's behaving this way because he's defending his homeland, and I feel the thing that it sort of does for the show is it says, whoa, these Romans are a little bit bloodthirsty. Like there's a that they respected that speech says something really bizarre about them. Do you know what I mean?
Well, yeah, I mean, bloodthirsty is part of it, but it's also just the fact that they don't take this threat as real in any way. I mean, it was entertaining to them to an extent. It's just. Well,
I think it was, but I think it also harkens back to the martial nature of Rome and how.
Oh yeah,
that's what they
respect. That's definitely part of it. But, yeah.
But it's just an odd, it was an unusual scene. I thought it was played well. But what I liked about it is how it plants the seed for when he says, okay, now I'm going to have Caractacus's son take you to England. It really helped lay the groundwork for that.
Sure.
So that when you get there, it works. But it was groundwork laying that wasn't just pure, it wasn't just setting up the table. It was a really engaging moment in the show on its own. And so that's why I liked it. But go ahead.
But yeah, just going back to the point about the nobody wanting the Republic anymore. It's Claudius kind of does half the job. He spends all his time kind of setting it up so the position of the emperor will be weak and just a joke. But he does nothing. He builds nothing as far as building up any kind of force that can be the Republican force that moves in after the emperor. And it's kind of revealed at that moment when he talks to Britannicus. He's like, well, there isn't anyone. It doesn't exist. It's
presumably he leaves it to Narcissus, but we don't know what And Narcissus, I assume, would have put all the right pieces in place, but without Britannicus and without the will among the Romans.
Yeah, I suppose you're right. Maybe Narcissus was doing more, but it's I don't know. I mean, once again, Narcissus is another older person who may have the same lack of connection to what people are really thinking too.
Well,
so
Narcissus is unusually virtuous in this show. Do you know what I mean? He's
exactly.
He's loyal. He's loyal to Claudius. Obviously, he does care about his own skin. At a few points, we do see him raise that issue, but he's honest about that. He doesn't conceal that from Claudius. So I feel like he's
just concerned he's going to get murdered. Is his concern. It's not like he's being selfish. Yeah. It's like, oh, you just got me killed. Is a reasonable concern.
So I find him a very endearing character. And I think this was an episode where he really shined. But that scene with Britannicus, it really is. I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed the relationship that he has throughout the episode with Britannicus, and how it's like you said, like these things keep harkening back. It harkens back to so many of those hopeful moments early in the show that just sort of were snuffed out by Livia. Do you know what I mean? It's that same kind of thing, and in this case, it's sort of maybe snuffed out by Claudius's own misestimation of the situation.
It's interesting because the reason his son turns it down, it is partly because he doesn't think there's any desire to go back to the Republic, but it's also because he thinks it would be cowardly to go run up there and hide. He's too direct, and it's interesting because it's a miscalculation on Claudius's part, because Claudius was always the guy who. He was basically a good person, but he was always willing to take the route of staying low, keeping your profile low, and he didn't understand his son at all. That his son wants to be this noble Roman character, not a guy who skulks off to Britain.
He's more like Germanicus or something. His son,
exactly.
And I think that's sort of the interesting thing, and it's also interesting when he dies. Narcissus and Britannicus have a conversation over him, and Britannicus kind of almost acts like his father was a loser on the way out. I forget what his exact phrasing was, but he says like, he says, I'm wearing my manly garb or my manly garments or whatever it was, and I can take care of myself. Too bad my father couldn't.
Yes,
and it's like, well, he took pretty good care of himself when you think about it. And so I think the thing about Britannicus is his flaw is he's kind of a little bit naive about all this stuff, and he doesn't seem to like. I think he has this this expectation that being brave is going to be all that's required. Being brave and strong is all that's needed in this situation, and maybe he is that way because he's been living in the shadow of his father's own sort of physical weakness and maybe doesn't respect his father's mind as much as he should. And so I think that's the lacking component with him. I think you're sort of, you really wish you would have made a different choice in the context of the show. You are, you know that it's a tragically bad decision. It's impossible to watch this and not have even if you only vaguely know Roman history, you probably know that things don't pan out well for Britannicus here. So I think the show does a very good job of a few things here. Number one, it helps sort of explain some of the erratic decisions that Claudius might have made. You know what I mean? It helps. If you want Claudius to be the hero of the show or the book, this is kind of a good way to do it, where it's sort of like he's got this this bizarre, tragic scheme that really does not work out. It's a complete miscalculation. It's an interesting patch to the problem of how do we turn this guy into sort of the hero of this story. But also I think that the whole way that they close the episode with the Sibyl and the conversation that he has with the Sibyl just really helps bring it to a nice conclusion. And so I don't know. There's a lot that happens in the show, and I don't know. I'm worried that if we go over every plot beat, we're going to be here for an hour and a half. So rather than do that, I think what I'd like to do is first ask you: is there anything in the show that you think was worth commenting on? Any episode in it that you think we need to dwell on before we get to sort of more general thoughts?
Let's see. A notable plot beat here. There's obviously the scene where he appears before the Senate and has his vision. That was when he gives his final speech to the Senate. Yeah, that is a remarkable scene there.
And in that one, he says something really unusual. He says, "The man who lives by the pool shall open their graves and deliver Rome up again." And he seems to be, on the one hand, one part of you thinks, was he talking about the the Christian end times, or what's going on here, or is he talking about his book? Do you know what I mean? Is that the because he's basically saying, I've known all these great people who have passed on, and they're going to speak again. People will know, what Rome truly was.
It may be unintentional, but it also crossed my mind that it's like you open up your graves. It's like the book is by graves that all this information is in too.
That's a really I completely missed that, but that's a really good point. That's probably deliberate. That's probably deliberate.
It very well could be. I don't know, but that immediately popped into my head.
But then he sees the ghosts of all the people, not all the, well, he sees the ghosts of everybody, but only a few actually speak to him. And they're all, many of them are actually, I think, younger than when they first show up in the show. Like Augustus and Livia are quite a bit younger. So it seems like they've all gone back to sort of their early adulthood. When they were, I don't know how old they're supposed to be, but basically the age of the actor, I think, is what we're seeing. And so Augustus is the first, and he says, "Well done, Claudius, emperor after all. Who would have thought?" And it's it's sort of it fits with what you would have expected Claudius to say. Then Livia says, "You're a fool, boy. You always were. People say it's not your fault, but if it's not your fault, whose is it, eh?" And so I wanted to comment on this because number one, Livia during the show, she spends so much time being mean and and kind of like she's villainous, but she's not like a seductive character or anything like that. All of her attributes are more oriented towards politics, and she's quite a bit older, at least by the second episode or so. Like she's playing an older lady for most of the time that we see her. You don't realize just how beautiful she's supposed to be, but in this scene, you sort of, number one, you realize how beautiful she is, but she also is speaking very seductively in that scene. And I realized going back, a lot of the way she was talking before was kind of seductive, and it just completely escaped me. Do you know what I mean? And so I thought that was kind of an interesting character detail. And then we go ahead.
Just to go on the Olivia thing, it's interesting too that she's someone that picks up on the fact during that birthday party scene, basically, she picks up on the fact that Claudius is not nearly as foolish as he acts. She's someone that sees through his act. So, her accusing him, well, if it's not your fault, who's it is partly because she knows that just for his own safety, to keep his head down and not take a stand on things, he was playing it up.
No, and that's the other thing about that last part of the line where she says, "If it's not your fault, who is it?" Eh? When she says that, you realize that's I don't think any other actors could have delivered that line that way, and I think that's why that woman's playing Livia. Do you know what I mean? Like the way she says that line, it's got like an edge and power to it that I'm struggling to quote it because I can't say it the way she said it.
No, there's something she does where she narrows her eyes right at the end when she's saying it. It's just nails, just puts like a punctuation on the end of the line so perfectly. I had to rewind 5 seconds just to watch the expression she was making again. I was like, yeah, that's beautiful.
And it's just a reminder of what a great character she was. Like you just because she passes away, many episodes ago. And you're like, oh yes, Livia. This is kind of where it all began. So I thought that was worth commenting on. And then when we get to Caligula, he's actually interrupted. Or I'm sorry, no, we have Antonia first, and she tells him that his nose is running. So that's pretty much what you would have expected.
Yes.
And then Caligula is interrupted by Tiberius, who tells him to wait his turn. And I think the interesting thing about Tiberius here is this is clearly the pre-darkness Tiberius. This is the Tiberius who still looks a little more human and compassionate than the Tiberius in the later episodes. And he basically says to him, "It wasn't worth it, was it? I could have told you that." And
well, it's funny. It is funny because it's like Claudius actually did do a lot of worthwhile things as emperor, So it was a very kind of seeing things purely from his own perspective kind of thing to say, really.
And I think he meant on a personal level, not necessarily on a I think there's an understanding that they're all kind of doing great things in different ways, even if they're horrible great things. But on a personal level, there was no deep gratification.
Yeah, of course. Because once again, though, I feel it's just Tiberius purely seeing things from his own perspective. Because it's not like Claudius did make any sacrifices to be the emperor. He at no point schemed to get his way on the throne and threw things away. It's like he just fell right into his lap.
And I think it's fitting that Caligula is the last one to speak. And he has sort of an interesting thing. He says, number one, he calls him Uncle Claudius, which I think it's sort of, again, it gets back to sort of that relationship they have is like a real, genuine relationship. And he says, I wasn't the Messiah after all. And he's got this boyish look on his face. And he says, who would believe it? You could have knocked me over with a feather when they told me. I don't know. It's a real sort of fitting end for Caligula's, story in the show.
It is, because it's like, he's so obsessed with being this god and, becoming the Messiah when we see him earlier. But it's funny that afterwards, it's like, ultimately, he's like, oh, when it turns out, when he dies, it's like he kind of, when he's actually finds he's not a god and he gets murdered, it's like this big act, but it's like afterwards he's like, oh well, guess I wasn't. He's just such a mercurial person that it just doesn't stick to him.
Well, and it's one of these things where like who would have thought you could make Caligula like that that sympathetic, like that, like he's a very likable character, despite the fact that he's a horrifying character in the show. And I really like how when he says Uncle Claudius, there's like a respect to what he's saying. Do you know what I mean? It's like there's a veneration for Claudius in the way he addresses him there. So it just works with the family theme of the show. But yeah, so I thought that that was definitely one of the that's a critical scene in the show, and it's funny because I remember when I first saw that scene, I didn't like it because it was sort of like dreamy and weird, and I don't know,
it easily could have been like, hey, here's all your favorite characters from the show. Yeah. Remember, it's the last episode. We're gonna trot them out for just for closure's sake. But no, but I really thought it was perfect. It worked perfectly for me. So when you say you didn't like it at first, like when the first time you watched the series years ago, you mean, or?
Yeah, I like the very first time I watched it, that scene just didn't land well with me for whatever. I don't remember the particulars, but I'm assuming it was because of what you were saying. I probably saw it as that kind of a scene. But in this time, I really liked it, and I think because I was seeing a lot of the things that I had. Like the first time you watch the show, you don't notice everything. And there's still things that I don't notice.
Oh, sure.
But over the years of watching it and thinking about it, a lot of the stuff that like really resonates with me has become more clear in my mind. And that scene this time around, it just brings a lot of those elements back together in a nice way. And so it's sort of, I just found it working better than it had, on my first viewing of it.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked before during this series about in my case, I haven't watched the series since I was in my early 20s when I was a very different person than I am in my mid 40s now. And yeah, this whole episode, I mean, I liked the episode the first time. I'm not going to say I didn't like it, but man, it's one of those things where I feel like I have a lot more perspective now, and it just... Yeah. This episode landed so much better because I am closer to the jaded person that Claudius is in this episode more than the more somewhat idealistic person I was in my early 20s.
Well, I think that is part of it. Because when I was younger and I watched like Claudius, like I said, you watch it at that age and you sort of you have certain feelings when certain moments in the show happen that are a little bit naive maybe, and now. You see the show, and there's something about this sort of older Claudius who's just kind of, sort of seen it all and making one last stab. But even when the stab doesn't land, he almost doesn't really care. He's too tired. Do you know what I mean? Like that scene with the Sibyl, she tells him like, Britannicus is going to be killed, and and Narcissus is going to be killed by Agrippinella, but then Nero will kill her. And he's like, oh. That's kind of how it always happens, isn't he? He's just very peaceful and grandfatherly in that regard. So I think that it's a nice closing scene, and it sort of matches as you get older, those kinds of passions fade. Like even Claudius's sort of burning passion to restore the Republic, it's not all that burning by the end. Do you know what I mean?
It's a residual thing.
Yeah.
But that's it. That's the thing that, once again, when I was younger, it's like restoring the Republic. It's like, well, of course, you've got to restore the Republic. It's like the show kind of letting go, like Britannicus not accepting that as a thing. It's just like that was just inconceivable to me at the time, but I'm like, okay, yeah, society changes, the world moves on. I mean, I still think it would be a good thing. I understand his perspective.
Well, and I think the point it's making is it's just not going to happen, whether it would be a good thing or not. That was sort of the point he was making.
Well, it's like you can't impose a republic. A republic is a collective thing. If there is no public desire for a republic, Britannicus can't go out there with his sword and enforce it.
And also, Britannicus was pretty honest. He was saying, "Look, I want my chance to rule. Like I want to be." Yeah, he wanted the power. He wasn't as nefarious as Agrippinella, but he was power hungry in his own way. And also, I mean, to be fair, Claudius did murder his mother. I think grand scheme of things, in this episode, Britannicus comes off pretty well because he, for all the stuff he's been through, including that, he's still pretty loyal to his father despite pretty significant mistreatment, even if it's well-intentioned mistreatment. That's a pretty difficult thing to sort of set aside. So, because what we see over the episode is he's just constantly favoring Nero and pushing Britannicus further and further out. Not really, and also he admits to Nero that early on he couldn't even show him affection because he believed he believed that Britannicus was Caligula's son, and so he didn't. And
to an extent, that's kind of cold to an extent, because it's like okay, well, he's not your son, but he's your nephew's son. It's like, I don't know. I would, I would still feel some sense of responsibility for someone in that case.
Well,
but
I think with Claudius, the issue was it was the sense of betrayal that he had with Messalina, and that was just the physical evidence. You know what I mean? Like after. Well,
was it a betrayal though? Like, I don't know. I mean, would it have been like if it was his first son? Like, Caligula? Well, yeah, I guess it would have been after. Yeah, I'm getting the timeline mixed up.
Well, no, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying in that respect. I'm saying the sense of betrayal he has after all the stuff that happened with Messalina happens. I think he sees, just like that's the point where like that's the starting point. Like he should have seen it the moment Caligula introduced her to him, and it would be very difficult, I think, knowing that after the fact for him to express any affection to Britannicus, because it's just a constant reminder of how naive he was and how do you know what I'm saying? Like he was just completely humiliated by this woman.
Because to me, I guess I wasn't looking at it through his perspective, because it never really quite occurred to me that this dancing girl that Caligula brings out to do this performance with him, that's like, of course there was something going on there. It's like, I just figured Caligula's done with her, he passes her off, to Claudius when he's done, but it's like the fact that she'd end up carrying his child, it's like, I I guess you're right. I'm just underestimating how blinkered he was about the whole situation.
But yeah, so I don't know. It was I think that it's a good closure, and it kind of brings me to the topic in gaming I wanted to get to, because as I was watching as I was watching this episode, I kept thinking to myself, this would be a really good starting point for a campaign, and the starting point is, the wake of Claudius's death. Mm-hmm. Britannicus's retinue, say that plan does go into effect, the plan that Britannicus refuses to participate in. That's a really interesting campaign to launch into.
It is.
And so I it doesn't necessarily have to be Roman. It could be in a fantasy setting. It could be in any setting, really. Any setting where you have royalty and a lineage of any kind. You could do it in a Chinese setting. You could do it in in anything. But I think it would be a really cool campaign as a launch pad, and I like the idea of sort of beginning with exile. Do you know what I mean? Like that's a really interesting starting point. And I've been in campaigns where people have had to sort of claim the throne, and they're very hit or miss. But I think this would be a really good premise that's strong enough to kind of sustain a solid campaign on it. I don't know if you could share those thoughts, but
no, it definitely could be good. And and you could go with a more traditional role-playing game, but I could see that would really make a good hill folk setup. It's like if you ran it with that system, it's like boom, just set it up as a TV show, and like in that with the main cast being the people that are all the different schemers, and you set up some conflict between them, like subtle conflicts between them, but they all have to work together towards this goal, and you'd have the ideal Hillfolk campaign.
I think that's what we should do, because we've been talking a long time about doing Hillfolk as I Claudius. I think that would be a really cool I Claudius campaign, because I think that starting point it gets us to a point where number one, you deviate enough from history, that it's sort of like anybody's game. Do you know what I mean? You don't really know how it's going to pan out. But you're also not doing this thing where you're just going through the motions of the show and do you know what I'm saying? Like, it's not like we're just sort of going back to like Claudius when he's younger, and everybody knows that what we really want is for Claudius to get to the point that's at the end of the show. We're sort of ripping this thing out of the show that never even really happened and making it happen and then seeing where it goes. So I think it would be kind of cool. And I think it could work for, like you said, it could work for a D&D campaign or any other kind of campaign. But I think it would work really well in Hillfolk, because I remember the experience when you ran Hillfolk, and it basically felt more I, Claudius than any other session I've ever had. And it had nothing to do with I, Claudius. It was like we were like primitive hill people, in the very, very early stages of history. But just the mood in the room when you're interacting with people in that game very much felt like the drama in the scenes in I, Claudius.
Everybody's got an agenda, but everyone's got connections. I mean, it's the family thing. It's like, with the relationship with Caligula and Claudius, it's like, well, because that's kind of the key to Hillfolk, because everyone has to be, they have to have some emotional connection, but they have to have some emotional conflict at the same time, and I, Claudius is full of those kind of relationships.
Well,
so.
And with I, Claudius, what I was wondering, because with the big thing about Hillfolk is the whole point in each scene is that each person wants something. And so it's a question of who gets what they want. And sometimes a person will give the person the win because there's an advantage in it for them mechanically or whatever. But this time around watching I, Claudius, I was noticing every scene is like that. And I've been paying attention to a lot of other shows, and not every scene is like that in a show. So I mean, I think ideally a lot of writers walk in with the assumption that that's what it should be. But I've been watching like police procedurals with my parents lately, and the a lot of the scenes don't do that for whatever reason.
No, that's different type of show entirely. Yeah. But
I, Claudius does that. It's every scene.
When you watch more dramatic based shows, it is a fun thing when you have Hillfolk in your head when you're watching a TV show like I, Claudius, and you think, okay, who's the petitioner in the scene? What are they trying to get? And it's like you actually, it's a cliche to like watch a TV show or a movie and try and imagine the role playing mechanics in your head, but it actually works with Hillfolk pretty well.
Well, because it really just boils down to the two characters want something and somebody's going to get something. You know what I mean? Like that's sort of like what it boils down to, and you can see it in every episode. Like you can just clearly see it in each scene.
I mean, like Breaking Bad is a show where you can do it too. In a lot of cases, it's like it'll come down to this character's doing this, but so that would be my number one mechanical pick. I mean, you can do it with any role playing game, because I mean, one thing I liked about running Hillfolk, because I ran it for a while in a previous campaign before the time we tried it, because we didn't really have enough players. The time we played, we just wanted to. You wanted to try the system like, well, we don't have enough players, but let's do a session, because if you don't have a full complement of players, you run out of. You don't have enough people to bounce scenes off with each other, and it gets a little stagnant. But the thing I found after I ran Hillfolk is when I was running. I think the next thing I ran was Delta Green, and in my head, every time there was an interaction with a player, I'm like, what are the players trying to get? What is this NPC trying to get? And I was like really nailing the role playing in those scenes, because we weren't using the Hillfolk mechanics, but I still had those mechanics kind of playing in my head. And so anyway, it's an interesting thing where you can kind of take ideas from that game and put them in anything without even using the mechanics.
No, I just think that would work fine as Hillfolk. I think Hillfolk's a very solid setup for that kind of situation. So I would agree with you. I think that's what we should run. And again, I think it would work fine for any other kind of campaign, because I think it's just the premise. It's not really like, I've been in a lot of D&D games where you have that sort of a situation. It could work well in, like if you were trying to do like a Pendragon type sort of spin-off. Do you know what I mean? Like take that kind of a system. You could do it with that. And I think you could do it with pretty much any game where where that sort of court intrigue and or sort of monarchy type system would make sense. And I think if you leaned on a D&D style campaign, it would just have different elements. There might be more of an clear sort of adventure approach to it. And with the Hill Folk, it would probably play out more like an Claudius series of episodes.
Yeah, because that's the thing. The sequel wouldn't necessarily have to feel like the show. It could be, lots of action-packed sword fights in Britain while you're in hiding. I mean, you'd have an utterly different show because it's like, there's a whole world to the series of Claudius that's going on outside those doors where you could have very different stories going on.
I wish I could remember the author's name. There are a lot of fictional. Sort of like historical fiction set in Rome. It's a really, for mysteries and all kinds of things. And I remember I read a series of books, and I cannot remember the name of the books or the author, but it was about the invasion of Britain, and it was great. And those would be like the top books I would definitely want to go back to if you were going to run something like this. Those would be perfect because it would give you all of the details that you would sort of need to have in your brain of how to manage that sort of region of Rome, just as a GM. Well, I guess in Hill Folk it's different because there is a GM, right? But it's not quite the same setup. The
GM, you've got a GM because for people that have never played Hill Folk, what you do is everyone takes a turn calling a scene, and you kind of do a scene. My character's going to try and get this character to do this, and you play the scene. And the GM gets a turn also calling scenes. The GM has a little more control over the game, obviously, but the GM's job in that is a little different in that basically if all the players are starting to get too friendly. I mean, obviously the GM's job is also to play any NPCs in scenes. If the players are all getting too friendly, they need to go, okay, how can I drive a wedge in here? And if everyone is getting too fractious. So it's getting to the point where it's like, okay, well, why isn't every character going to just murder each other now? Mm-hmm. Then you kind of have to throw in the outside threat and go, hey guys, you better work together. So it's that, you've kind of got this because actually there was a podcast recently where Robin Laws talked about why there's a GM, because people were asking him, how would you play it without a GM? And he's like, you wouldn't, because without the GM, he found that it tends to either everyone becomes buddies, like, in a sitcom in the third season where everybody likes the grumpy neighbor now, or it's like, hey, everybody's friends and there's no one throwing insults at each other, and those insults were funny and the show's not as funny anymore, but but in a dramatic sense. But he's like, it's like you need someone to stir the pot or calm the pot down when it gets too stirred. Someone needs to be objective and stand outside and guide things a little.
Yeah, no, I think, but I think Hill Folk would work really well for it. And again, I think the reason why is because the moment I played that game with you guys, it was exactly like Claudius in my head. It just felt like that kind of, I'm in this just to give some background here. These usually I'm fairly traditional in my taste with games. I would say, would you say it's probably pretty accurate? I tend to lean on traditional, and I tend to be very immersive, and so I'm always a little bit reluctant with games like this. But this one, I found those there's stuff around the scenes that's not immersive, but once you get in the scene, it was so deeply immersive. I was stunned. I was very surprised. And it reminded me of back in the 90s when we would play. A lot of times we would just kind of stop using the dice and just role play. Do you know what I mean? It almost became a cliche, and we went way too far overboard with it. But it reminded me of those times when we were deeply in character, just kind of enjoying, playing the character. But because there's a structure to it, it's not aimless. Do you know what I mean? It's not just sort of you're just doing it forever. It has a purpose.
Which brings up the other point of the GM is that when if a player's trying to get something from another player and they keep going in circles, it's the GM's job to go, okay, scene. The scene's over. The guy's not going to give it to you. End of scene. Yeah. We've established that. Well, but because that's the thing. My problem with a lot of games that are similar in concept to hill folk are that they have mechanics for determining what happens inside the scene. Hill folk, the mechanics are all there to set up the scene, and then you literally just play the scene.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of these games, which I'm not going to badmouth any games because a lot of them are good games, but they when you get to that crucial dramatic moment, suddenly you'll stop role playing and you'll pull dice out and decide, well, how does my character feel about this? And it's like, that's exactly what I don't want from this kind of game.
Yeah. No, I would agree. And there is like a mechanical incentive, if I remember, right? Like there's like a mechanical incentive to maybe give in sometimes. But
it's determined after the scene, not during it. You're like, did I get what I want, and that kind of thing. You talk about it afterwards.
And also it kind of emulates what's going on anyways, which is in a give and take situation. You might give in because it's giving you like if me and Adam are arguing over the podcast and Adam really wants to do like a Bozo the Clown episode for some reason and I'm confused as to why, but I might give in because I know that down the road Adam might be willing to do a show that I want to do or something, and so that's that mechanic isn't so far away from that it is disruptive in any way. It's a good way to sort of get at that without actually having to have the episode, the thing down the road that you get back for giving in that time. Do you know what I mean?
It's a thing where, because basically the thing it's trying to emulate is when you're dealing with your family or your friends, you have to give in sometimes. And role players when they're playing their character, like my character wants this, and they're not. They get so caught up in the abstract idea of what their character wants that they're not acting like a person anymore. Where people give up on things all the time. It's like, okay, this time, this isn't that important to me. You win this argument. I don't need to just yell all night about this.
But yeah, so I don't know. I think that would be, if we do that, we'll probably take it to RPG Lab or talk about it in some way, because I think that'll be fun. And I think it's an interesting premise. So I don't. But this is it. This is the last Claudius episode. It's again, I do have to apologize for how long this took. I know we were really me more than anybody, but I think it was kind of nice staggering it out because I feel like I savored each episode more. And normally when I watch Claudius, I just kind of flurry through all of them, and this gave me more thinking space between episodes, which actually was kind of nice.
I like that as well. That's one thing I don't like about binge TV culture now, is that there is something to be said for taking a moment and thinking about an episode before you jump into the next episode. It's I feel like not enough happens of that right now, but this is definitely a show where you can take a break between episodes and get a lot out of it.
Exactly. And I think it was I don't know, it was a lot of fun revisiting, and I was actually a little bit surprised, even though I know you only last saw it in your 20s, so you have a good excuse. But the last time I saw it was like 2012 or so, when I was working on Servants of Gaius. I made a point of rewatching it a couple of times and reading the books a couple of times. And I don't know, I guess with age, your memory just kind of isn't what it used to be.
That's it.
But it really was enjoyable. And also, I was kind of worried. I was like, I saw it in 2012 again. Maybe that's too soon because it is a long series, and maybe I'll be bored watching it this soon after. But
technically, it's the shortest show we've ever covered. So.
That's true. Yeah, I've built up so much endurance because we've been doing like Babylon 5 and Return of Condor Heroes and like these super mega 100 episode shows that it's
nothing.
Yeah. Compared to Babylon 5, this was like eating vanilla ice cream. It was easy.
This is one season of Torchwood.
Yeah.
But,
it's one season of Torchwood. But yeah, so I guess we're going to continue on with the Doctor Who this season, and we'll probably also start bringing in some other things now that we're done with Claudius. I don't know what it's going to be. I know there was some talk of maybe a wuxia series, some talk of something else. We might want to do a couple of movies to cleanse the palate, which is always good. or maybe a book. I know that we've had some books that have. I have a stack of books actually that I know I really need to get to, and one of them is related to a movie that we were going to watch at one point. I think Something Wicked This Way Comes was the.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's right. Well, Torchwood led into that. That's right.
I actually bought the movie and the book, so I'm you know.
Well,
but
maybe,
go ahead.
I know Matt's a big Bradbury fan, so maybe that's the time we can finally get him to come in on the podcast.
Yeah. Well, if we can contend with his encyclopedic knowledge of film, I think we'll. But yeah, I think that would be a good idea. Though I'd also kind of, I mean, there's a lot of type of movies and shows I'd like to have him on for. Now that I'm thinking about it.
Exactly.
And over at Wuxia Workshop, we are going to be covering Heroes Shed No Tears next time. That's what me and Joel have decided. So I know we reviewed it on the Wuxia Weekend podcast. I've reviewed it on the website before, and so now me and Joel are going to talk about it in a gaming context. And then after that, we're hoping to do a Chinese ghost story with Adam and Joel present for the discussion. And so that I think that should be interesting. And yeah, so tomorrow, Flying Swords of Dragon Gate. This is the Jet Li movie by Shui Hark. It's or Choi Hark. It's one of the Dragon Gate Inn movies. We slowly over the course of Wuxia Weekend, I've been forcing people to do Dragon Gate movies, and this is the last one. So so I'm looking forward to talking about it. And I guess until then, we will talk to you later.